The boy had been watching the motorcycle for 15 minutes. He stood at the edge of the diner parking lot, half hidden behind a rusted pickup truck, his eyes fixed on the gleaming black Harley-Davidson with its chrome pipes and leather saddlebags. The morning sun caught the metal and threw light across the cracked asphalt, and the boy squinted against the glare, but didn't look away. He was working up the courage to go inside. Inside, Jack Cole was on his third cup of coffee and his second plate of eggs. The diner was quiet this early. Just him, an elderly couple in the corner booth, and a trucker at the counter who kept checking his phone. Patty's Diner had been a regular stop for Jack for almost 20 years, ever since he joined the Oklahoma chapter of the Hells Angels and started making the ride between Tulsa and Oklahoma City every few weeks. The food was decent, the coffee was strong, and Patty herself, now pushing 70 but still working the morning shift, never looked at his vest with fear or judgment. She just filled his cup and asked about his daughter and treated him like any other customer. That was rare enough to keep him coming back. Jack was reaching for his coffee when he noticed the boy through the window. The kid was small, too thin, wearing a faded t-shirt that might have been blue once but had washed to something closer to gray. His jeans had holes at the knees, not the fashionable kind, but the kind that came from actual wear and not enough money to replace them. But it wasn't the clothes that caught Jack's attention. It was the way the kid kept looking at the door, then looking away, taking a step forward, then stopping. His hands were shoved in his pockets, and even from this distance, Jack could see them moving, fidgeting, working through some internal debate. The kid was scared, and he was trying to decide whether to come inside. Jack had seen that look before. In his 47 years on this earth, he'd seen it more times than he wanted to count. It was the look of someone who'd run out of options and was about to take a risk they weren't sure they'd survive. He set down his coffee and waited. Marcus Reeves had been planning this for 3 days. 3 days of pretending everything was normal. 3 days of making sure Lily ate what little food their uncle provided. 3 days of checking the locks on their bedroom door at night, knowing the flimsy chain wouldn't stop a determined adult, but needing the illusion of safety anyway. Before their mother died, Marcus had been a different boy. A happy boy. The kind of kid who rode his bike to school and played catch in the backyard and believed adults when they said everything would be okay. He'd had a best friend named Tyler who lived next door, a treehouse they'd built together, a dog named Rusty who slept at the foot of his bed every night. All of that was gone now. Tyler's family had moved away. The treehouse had been left behind when they went to live with Uncle Carl. Rusty had been taken to a shelter because their uncle didn't allow pets. Everything Marcus had known, everything that had made him feel safe and loved, had been stripped away piece by piece. But he still had Lily. And he would die before he let anything happen to his little sister. The night before his walk to the diner, Marcus had lain awake in the darkness, listening to Lily's breathing from the mattress on the floor beside his bed. She slept curled into a tight ball these days, making herself as small as possible, as if she could disappear into the shadows if she tried hard enough. Sometimes she whimpered in her sleep, caught in nightmares that Marcus couldn't protect her from. That night, the nightmares had been particularly bad. Lily had woken up crying, and Marcus had crawled down to her mattress and held her until the shaking stopped. "It hurts," she'd whispered in the darkness. "Marcus, it hurts." He'd known she wasn't talking about a physical injury. Not this time anyway. She was talking about the hurt that lived inside her now. The hurt that their uncle had planted like a poisonous seed and that grew larger every day they stayed in this house. "I know," he'd whispered back. "But I'm going to fix it. I promise. Tomorrow, I'm going to get us help. How? I have a plan. Mom told me once about people who help kids like us. I'm going to find them. Lily had looked at him with those big hazel eyes, too young to carry so much pain. What if they don't believe you? What if Uncle Carl finds out? Marcus had thought about this. He'd thought about the risk, about what their uncle would do if the plan failed. But the alternative, waiting for Saturday, waiting for the man called Pearson to arrive and take them away, was worse. Whatever happened to kids who got sold to men like that, Marcus knew it was worse than anything their uncle had done so far. They'll believe me, he'd said, with more confidence than he felt. And if Uncle Carl finds out, well, at least I tried. At least I didn't just let it happen. Lily had been quiet for a long moment. Then she'd squeezed his hand. You're brave, Marcus. Mom would say you're being brave. Mom would say we're both brave. You too, Lily. You're the bravest person I know. It wasn't entirely true. Lily was terrified most of the time, and she'd stopped talking to anyone except Marcus months ago. But sometimes, Marcus knew, people needed to hear things that weren't entirely true. Sometimes they needed to hear what they could become, not what they were. He'd held his sister until she fell back asleep. Then he'd lain there in the darkness, running through his plan for the 100th time, checking for flaws, steeling himself for what he was about to do. At 4:30 in the morning, when the first gray light of dawn was barely visible through their grimy window, Marcus had slipped out of bed, kissed his sleeping sister's forehead, and whispered, "Stay under the bed until I come back. No matter what. I love you." Then he'd climbed out the window, dropped to the ground below, and started walking. Ever since he'd overheard his uncle on the phone, talking about the arrangement and making sure the kids stay quiet, Marcus had known he needed to tell someone. The problem was figuring out who. Not the teachers at school. His uncle had pulled them out 2 months ago, claiming he was going to homeschool them. Not the neighbors. The nearest house was 2 miles away, and his uncle had told them stories about the Reeves kids, about how troubled they were, how they made things up for attention. Not the police. Marcus had tried that once, 3 months ago, walking the 5 miles to the sheriff's station to report what was happening at the farmhouse. His uncle had picked him up before he got there, and the punishment afterward had taught Marcus that going to the authorities wasn't safe. His uncle had friends, connections, people who owed him favors and looked the other way. But bikers were different. Marcus knew this because of a story his mother had told him, back before she'd gotten sick, back before she'd died, and he and Lily had been sent to live with Uncle Carl. She'd told him about her brother, his real uncle, not Carl, who'd ridden with a motorcycle club down in Texas. She'd told him how the club took care of their own, how they protected people who couldn't protect themselves, how they had a code that put loyalty and honor above everything else. If you're ever really in trouble, she'd said, find someone who rides. They might look scary, but they're the ones who'll help. Marcus had held on to those words for 2 years, and now, standing in the parking lot of Patty's Diner, staring at the Harley Davidson that belonged to the big man eating breakfast inside, he was about to find out if his mother had been right. He took a deep breath. Thought about Lily, back at the farmhouse, too scared to come with him, but too young to understand how bad things were about to get if he didn't do something. Thought about the phone call he'd overheard, about his uncle's plans to move the kids to someone who'd pay good money for them. And then Marcus walked into the diner. Jack watched the boy push through the door, watched him scan the room with those quick, nervous eyes, watched him spot the leather vest and freeze for just a moment before forcing himself to keep walking. The kid had guts. Whatever he was scared of, it wasn't the Hell's Angels patch on Jack's back. Marcus stopped at the edge of Jack's booth. Up close, he looked even younger than Jack had thought. Still had that roundness to his face that kids lose when they hit puberty. But his eyes were old. The kind of old that came from seeing things no child should have to see. "Can I help you, son?" Jack kept his voice low, gentle, the same voice he used with his own daughter when she'd had nightmares as a little girl. Marcus's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He glanced back toward the door, like he was checking to make sure no one had followed him, then looked at Jack again. His voice cracked. "I need to tell someone something, and I think you might be the only one who can help." Jack gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit down. Take your time." The boy slid into the booth, perching on the edge of the seat like he was ready to run at any moment. His hands were on the table, and Jack could see them trembling. "You want something to eat?" Jack asked. "You look hungry." Marcus shook his head. "I can't stay long. If he finds out I left..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "My sister, Lily, she's still there, at the house, and I heard him on the phone, talking about selling us to some man. And he said if I ever told anyone, he'd hurt her. He'd hurt Lily worse than before." Jack felt something cold settle in his chest. 23 years in the club had taught him to keep his emotions off his face, but it was harder with kids. It was always harder with kids. "Slow down," he said. "Start from the beginning. Who's he?" "My uncle, Carl Simmons. We've been living with him since our mom died. He's supposed to be taking care of us, but..." Marcus's voice dropped to a whisper. "He doesn't take care of us. He hurts us, and now he's going to sell us to someone, and I don't know what to do. I tried going to the police before, but he found out, and he has friends there, and..." The boy's composure cracked. His eyes filled with tears, and he scrubbed at them angrily with the back of his hand, like crying was a weakness he couldn't afford. "I don't know who else to ask," Marcus said. "My mom told me once that bikers help people, that they have a code. Is that true? Can you help us, please?" Jack reached across the table and put his hand over the boy's trembling fingers. "What's your name, son?" "Marcus. Marcus Reeves." "Marcus, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer them as honestly as you can. Can you do that?" Marcus nodded. "Where do you live? The address?" "Route 7, about 10 miles east. The old farmhouse with the red barn that's falling down. You can't miss it. There's a rusted truck in the yard that hasn't moved in years." "And your sister, Lily, she's there now?" "Yes. She's hiding in our room. I told her to stay under the bed until I got back. Uncle Carl was passed out when I left, but he could wake up any time." "How did you get here?" "Walked. Through the fields, not the road. It took about 2 hours." Jack processed this information. A 2-hour walk through fields meant the kid had left before dawn, probably while it was still dark. That took more than guts. That took desperation. "One more question, Marcus. The man your uncle was talking to on the phone, the one who wants to buy you and your sister, did you hear a name? Anything that might help us identify him?" Marcus thought hard, his forehead creasing with the effort of remembering. "He called him Mr. Pearson, I think. He said Mr. Pearson would be there on Saturday to pick us up. That's in 2 days." Jack felt the cold in his chest turn to ice. 2 days. This kid had 2 days before something unthinkable happened to him and his little sister. He pulled out his phone. "Marcus, I'm going to make some calls. I need you to stay right here and eat some breakfast." He held up a hand when the boy started to protest. I know you're scared. I know you want to get back to your sister. But you walked 2 hours to get here, and you're going to need your strength for what comes next. I'm going to help you, I promise. But first, I need to talk to some people." The boy studied Jack's face, looking for deception, looking for the lie that would prove his mother's words wrong. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, because he nodded slowly. "Okay," Marcus said. "I'll stay." Jack caught Patty's eye and gestured for her to bring food. Then he slid out of the booth and walked toward the door, already dialing the first of many numbers he'd need to call. Behind him, he heard Marcus's voice, small and hopeful. "You're really going to help?" Jack looked back at the boy, at his worn clothes and his old eyes and his trembling hands that had finally gone still. "Kid," he said, "I'm going to do more than help. I'm going to make sure no one ever hurts you or your sister again." The phone tree lit up like a brush fire. Jack's first call was to Victor Martinez, the chapter president, known to everyone in the club as Ghost. Victor had earned the nickname in Vietnam, where his ability to move through the jungle undetected had saved his squad's lives more times than anyone could count. These days, he moved through the bureaucratic jungle with the same silent efficiency, navigating legal challenges and community relationships with a skill that had kept the chapter strong for decades. "We've got a situation," Jack said without preamble. 2 kids, farmhouse on Route 7, uncle's planning to sell them to a trafficker in 2 days. Kid walked 2 hours through fields to find someone who'd believe him. There was a brief pause. Victor didn't waste words on exclamations or expressions of shock. He just processed the information and asked the necessary questions. "How solid is the intel?" "Solid enough." The boy heard the phone call himself. Named a buyer, someone called Pearson, coming Saturday. "Law enforcement?" "Kid says the uncle has connections. Tried going to the sheriff before and got burned." Another pause. "I'll make some calls. See who we can trust. In the meantime, start the chain. I want everyone mobile in 30 minutes. We'll meet at the crossroads on Route 7, quarter-mile from the farmhouse. Full colors. We're not hiding who we are." "Understood." "And Jack?" "Yeah?" "Keep that boy safe. He's shown more courage than most adults I know. Make sure he knows we honor that." Jack looked back through the diner window at Marcus, who was now hunched over a plate of pancakes, eating like he hadn't seen food in days, which, Jack realized, might actually be the case. "I'll take care of him," Jack said. "You take care of the rest." The calls went out in rapid succession. Victor called his sergeants-at-arms, who called their road captains, who called every patched member in a 50-mile radius. Within 20 minutes, 180 Hells Angels knew the basics: 2 children in danger, a farmhouse on Route 7, and a meetup in 30 minutes. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Men who'd been sleeping off late-night rides woke up and grabbed their keys. Men who'd been at work called in emergencies and walked out. Men who'd been arguing with their wives or fixing their bikes or watching morning television dropped everything and headed for their motorcycles. Because this was what they did. This was who they were. The Hells Angels had a reputation. Some of it earned, some of it exaggerated, most of it misunderstood. Yes, they were outlaws. Yes, they'd had run-ins with the law. Yes, some members had done things that wouldn't hold up to moral scrutiny. But when it came to children, there was no ambiguity, no debate, no hesitation. You did not hurt kids, and if you did, you answered to the club. Deputy Sarah Chen was halfway through her morning paperwork when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She almost let it go to voicemail. Unknown numbers were usually telemarketers or wrong numbers. But something made her pick up. "Deputy Chen." Deputy, this is Victor Martinez. I'm the president of the Oklahoma chapter of the Hells Angels. We need to talk. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. In her 3 years with the sheriff's department, she'd had exactly 0 conversations with motorcycle club presidents. This was either very good or very bad. I'm listening. We've got credible information about a child trafficking situation about to go down in your jurisdiction. 2 kids, brother and sister, being held at a farmhouse on Route 7 by their uncle. Buyers coming Saturday. The boy escaped and found one of my guys at a diner this morning. Sarah was already reaching for her notepad. What's the address? Victor gave her the details. The farmhouse location, Carl Simmons' name, the mention of someone called Pearson. Sarah wrote everything down, her mind racing through procedures and protocols. Why are you calling me specifically? She asked. Why not just dial 911? Because the boy tried going to law enforcement before. His uncle found out about it, which means someone in your department tipped him off. I need to know if you're clean before I trust you with these kids' lives. It was a fair question, and Sarah appreciated the directness. She also knew exactly who the leak probably was. Deputy Martinez, no relation to Victor, who had a gambling problem and a habit of doing favors for people who could help him cover his debts. I'm clean, she said, and I think I know who isn't. I can work around him if you can keep this quiet until we're ready to move. That's the plan. We're mobilizing now. Should have about 180 riders at the scene within the hour. We'll provide perimeter support and make sure this uncle doesn't have any escape routes, but the actual extraction needs to be done by law enforcement. I don't want any technicalities letting this bastard walk. Sarah was impressed despite herself. She'd expected chaos, vigilante justice, maybe some broken bones. Instead, she was getting coordinated strategy and respect for legal procedures. I'll need to bring in someone I trust from CPS, she said, and probably a couple of paramedics, just in case the kids need medical attention. Do what you need to do. Just make sure everyone you bring is solid. This can't leak. Understood. I'll meet you at the crossroads in 45 minutes. We'll be there. Back at the diner, Marcus had finished his pancakes and was working on a glass of orange juice when Jack slid back into the booth across from him. Here's what's going to happen, Jack said. A lot of my friends are coming to help your sister. We're also going to have a police officer there, a good one, someone we can trust, to make sure everything's done right. We're going to get Lily out of that house, and then we're going to make sure your uncle can never hurt either of you again. Marcus's eyes went wide. How many friends? About 180, give or take. The boy's mouth fell open. That's a lot of motorcycles. Yeah, it is. Your sister's going to hear them coming from a mile away. She's going to know help is on the way. Jack leaned forward, his voice softening. Marcus, I need you to do something brave for me. I need you to stay in the truck with one of my guys while we handle this. I know you want to be there, and I know you want to protect your sister. But the safest thing for both of you is if you're out of the way when we go in. Can you do that? Marcus nodded slowly. Will you tell Lily I'm okay? That I went to get help? I'll tell her myself. I promise. The boy looked down at his empty plate, then back up at Jack. His eyes were still too old, still carried too much weight. But there was something new in them now, something that looked like hope. Why are you doing this? Marcus asked. You don't know us. You don't owe us anything. Why would you and all your friends come help 2 kids you've never met? Jack thought about the question, thought about his own daughter, now 23 and living in Austin with a husband and a baby on the way, thought about the world he wanted her to live in, the world he wanted his grandchild to grow up in. Because someone has to, he said finally. Because there are people in this world who prey on the vulnerable, who think they can get away with hurting kids because no one's watching. And then there are people like us, people who've made a choice to be the ones who watch, to be the ones who show up when no one else will. He reached across the table and put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. Your mom was right about us, kid. We do have a code. And the first rule of that code is this: you protect the innocent, no matter what, no matter who, no matter how dangerous it gets. You protect the innocent, because if you don't, then what the hell are you even doing with your life? Marcus didn't say anything, but for the first time since he'd walked into the diner, his hands had stopped trembling. The convoy assembled at the crossroads exactly 47 minutes after Victor's first phone call. 180 motorcycles, arranged in neat rows along the shoulder of Route 7, their chrome catching the mid-morning sun. The riders stood in groups, talking quietly, checking their phones for updates, watching the road for any sign of trouble. They were an intimidating sight, even to each other. Leather vests covered in patches, tattoos visible on every arm, faces that had seen violence and hardship and had come out the other side harder and more determined. But their purpose today wasn't violence. It was rescue. Deputy Sarah Chen arrived in her patrol car with two people she'd trusted with her life before. A CPS caseworker named Diane Morrison, who'd been doing child protection work for 15 years and had seen every horror humans could inflict on each other, and a paramedic named Tom Whitfield, who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before coming home to work for the county. Victor met them at the edge of the formation, his gray beard and commanding presence marking him as the leader even before he spoke. Deputy, glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it. Sarah looked out at the assembled riders. This is quite a turnout. Word spreads fast when kids are involved. Victor nodded toward the farmhouse, visible as a speck in the distance at the end of a long dirt driveway. Our guy Jack is about half a mile out with the boy. He'll stay there until we give the all clear. We've got 2 riders watching the back of the property in case the uncle tries to run. Everyone else will form a perimeter once you give the signal. What about the girl? The boy said she's hiding under the bed in their room, upstairs, back of the house. She's been told to stay there until Marcus comes to get her. Sarah processed this. Okay, here's how we do it. I go in first with Diane. Standard welfare check. We've had a report of children in distress and we need to verify their safety. If the uncle cooperates, great. If he doesn't, we call for backup and your people make sure he doesn't get anywhere. And if he's armed, then I deal with it. That's my job. Sarah checked her weapon, then looked at Victor. I appreciate the support, but let me be clear. No one else goes in unless I call for help. I can't have civilians involved in what might become an active crime scene. Victor nodded. Understood. We're here to make sure he can't run and to show these kids that they've got an army on their side. But the hard work is yours. The farmhouse looked worse up close. Peeling paint, sagging porch, windows so grimy they were nearly opaque. The yard was more weeds than grass, and the rusted truck Marcus had mentioned was actually 2 rusted trucks and what might have been a tractor at some point, all slowly decomposing into the earth. Sarah parked her patrol car at the end of the driveway, clearly visible but not blocking any exits. Behind her, she could hear the rumble of 180 motorcycles moving into position, surrounding the property like a living fence. Whatever Carl Simmons thought he was going to do today, running wasn't going to be an option. She walked to the front door with Diane at her side. The CPS worker had a clipboard and a practiced expression of professional concern. Sarah had her hand near her weapon, but not on it. She knocked. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then she heard shuffling inside, the sound of something being knocked over, muttered cursing. The door opened a crack, and a face peered out, gaunt, unshaven, with eyes that darted nervously toward the motorcycles surrounding his property. Carl Simmons? Who's asking? Deputy Sarah Chen, Granger County Sheriff's Department. This is Diane Morrison from Child Protective Services. We've received a report of children in distress at this address, and we need to conduct a welfare check. Carl's eyes narrowed. Those kids are fine. They're my sister's kids. I'm their legal guardian. We're doing just fine. I'm glad to hear that, sir, but we still need to verify their well-being. May we come in? You got a warrant? For a welfare check? No, sir. We don't need one. But if you'd prefer, we can wait here while I call a judge and get one. I imagine that would take about an hour, during which time those gentlemen on the motorcycles would be happy to keep you company. Carl looked at the bikers again. His face went pale. Fine. Come in, but make it quick. The inside of the house was worse than the outside. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, trash overflowing from bags that hadn't been taken out in weeks, a smell of stale beer and cigarette smoke, and something else, something chemical that made Sarah's nose wrinkle. Where are the children? Diane asked, her professional mask firmly in place. Upstairs, in their room. They like to sleep late. It's 11 o'clock in the morning. They're kids. Kids sleep a lot. Sarah started toward the stairs. Carl moved to block her. Now hold on. Mr. Simmons, I'm going to ask you to step aside. We need to see the children. I said they're fine. And I said we need to verify that. Step aside, please. This is your final warning. Something in Sarah's voice must have convinced him, because he stepped back, his hands raised in mock surrender. But his eyes followed her as she climbed the stairs, and she could feel them on her back like insects crawling on her skin. She found the room easily. It was the only door that was closed. She knocked gently. Lily, my name is Sarah. I'm a police officer. Your brother Marcus sent me. He's safe, and he wants me to help you. Can you come out? Silence. Lily, I know you're scared. I know you were told to hide until Marcus came for you. But Marcus couldn't come himself. He's waiting for you somewhere safe. He asked me to bring you to him. Can you open the door? More silence. Then slowly, the door cracked open. A pair of hazel eyes peered out, the same eyes Sarah had seen in the boy's description, but bigger, wider, more frightened. Is Marcus really okay? The voice was barely a whisper. He's really okay. He's very brave, and he walked a long way to find help for you. He wanted me to tell you that everything's going to be fine now. The door opened wider. The girl was exactly as described, thin, wearing an oversized pink sweater, her sandy brown hair in a messy ponytail. But she also had a bruise on her cheek that hadn't been mentioned, and she was holding her left arm at an odd angle. Sarah felt the cold settle back into her chest. She'd seen these injuries before. She knew what they meant. Lily, can you come with me? We're going to take you somewhere safe. The girl looked past Sarah, toward the stairs, toward the man she knew was waiting down there. He'll be angry. He won't be able to hurt you anymore. I promise. Lily considered this. Her little mind was racing, processing everything she'd experienced over the past 2 years. The broken promises. The adults who said they'd help, but never did. The time Marcus had gone to the police and come back with new bruises and a warning to never try that again. But something was different this time. Through the grimy window of her bedroom, Lily had seen the motorcycles. She'd heard them coming from far away. a rumbling thunder that grew louder and louder until it seemed to shake the walls of the farmhouse itself. She'd peeked out from under the bed, watching through the window as more motorcycles than she'd ever seen in her life surrounded her uncle's property. An army. Marcus had somehow summoned an army. Her brother had told her stories about their mother's other brother, the one who'd ridden with a motorcycle club, the one who died before they were born. He'd told her that bikers protected people, that they had a code. She'd wanted to believe him, but hadn't quite been able to. Now, looking at the deputy in her doorway and listening to the rumble of all those engines outside, she started to believe. "Is Marcus really safe?" she asked again, needing to hear it one more time. "He's really safe. He's waiting for you right now, just down the road. He sent all these people to help you." Lily felt something shift inside her chest. It wasn't quite hope. Hope had been beaten out of her months ago. But it was something. A small, flickering possibility that maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was actually ending. "Okay," she said. "I'll come with you." She took Sarah's hand. The deputy's grip was warm and firm and nothing like Uncle Carl's grip, which was always too tight and always left marks. As they walked toward the stairs, Lily heard the motorcycles idling outside, and she thought about Marcus, her brave, stupid, wonderful brother who had walked for hours in the dark to find someone who would believe them. "I knew he'd do it," she whispered, so quietly that Sarah almost didn't hear. "What's that, sweetheart?" "I knew Marcus would save us. I knew it." Sarah squeezed her hand gently. "He did save you, and he's going to be so happy to see you." What happened next went exactly according to plan, which was somewhat miraculous given how these things usually went. Carl Simmons did try to stop them as they came down the stairs. He blocked the doorway and demanded to know where they were taking his niece. When Sarah told him Lily was being taken into protective custody pending an investigation, he got aggressive, pushed forward, raised his voice, made the kind of threats that people make when they know they're about to lose control of a situation. That was when Victor appeared on the porch behind them. He didn't say anything, didn't have to. He just stood there, all 6'3" of him, with his gray beard and his president's patch, and an expression that said very clearly that he was willing and able to remove Carl Simmons from the equation by whatever means necessary. Carl backed down. He backed down further when Sarah produced handcuffs and informed him that he was being detained for questioning regarding suspected child abuse and trafficking. He started to sputter, to threaten, to invoke lawyers and connections and all the people who would make her regret this. Sarah just smiled. "Mr. Simmons, I want you to look around. I want you to count the number of people currently surrounding your property, and then I want you to consider how many of those connections you think will still be useful to you by the end of the day." Carl looked. He counted. He went very, very quiet. Marcus was waiting in the back of a pickup truck, guarded by a massive biker named Tiny, who was, ironically, the largest person Sarah had ever seen when Sarah brought Lily around the corner of the house. The reunion was everything you'd want it to be. The boy launched himself out of the truck bed, hit the ground running, and wrapped his arms around his sister with a force that seemed impossible for someone so small. Lily clung to him, sobbing, her face buried in his shoulder. They stood there for a long moment, two children who'd been through hell and had somehow found their way out. Around them, 180 bikers watched in silence. Some of them were crying. None of them were ashamed of it. Jack crouched down next to the kids, his hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You did good, son. You did real good. Your mom would be proud of you." Marcus looked up at him with wet eyes. Is it really over? Are we really safe? It's really over, and you're really safe. I promise. The investigation that followed would uncover more than anyone had expected. It started with the farmhouse itself. When forensic investigators arrived, after Carl Simmons had been transported to county jail, after Marcus and Lily had been taken to the hospital for examination, after the 180 bikers had finally dispersed with promises to return if needed, they found evidence that told a story far worse than anyone had imagined. Hidden in the basement, behind a false wall that Carl had built himself, investigators found a room. It was small, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet, with a bare mattress on the floor and a bucket in the corner. The walls were covered in marks, tally marks, scratched into the drywall with a fingernail or a piece of wire. Someone had been counting the days. DNA analysis would later reveal that at least 4 different children had been held in that room over the past 5 years. Marcus and Lily had never been put down there. Their uncle had kept them upstairs, in plain sight, to maintain the appearance of a normal household. But other children, the ones who'd passed through his hands on their way to buyers like Pearson, had spent days or weeks in that underground cell. 2 of those children were eventually found and reunited with their families. One had aged out of the system and was living on the streets in Kansas City. A task force tracked him down and connected him with services. The 4th was never identified. The investigators believed she might have been one of the foster children who'd run away from Carl's care years ago. Her disappearance never properly investigated. Carl Simmons had been running what amounted to a child trafficking operation for nearly 8 years, using his access to vulnerable children, nieces, nephews, foster kids he'd convinced the system to place with him, to supply a network of buyers who paid well for silence and discretion. The trial, when it came, was the biggest news story the county had seen in decades. The courtroom was packed every day. Community members who wanted to understand how something this evil had happened in their backyard, journalists from state and national outlets, and, in the back rows, a rotating group of bikers in leather vests who never said anything but whose presence sent a clear message to everyone involved. Marcus had to testify. It was the hardest thing he'd ever done. The prosecutor had prepared him as best she could, explaining what questions would be asked and how to answer them. She'd told him he could take breaks if he needed to, that he could ask for water, that no one would think less of him if he cried. He hadn't cried. He'd sat in the witness chair, looked at his uncle across the courtroom, and answered every question in a clear, steady voice. He'd described the abuse, the threats, the phone call he'd overheard. He'd explained how he'd walked through the fields in the dark, how he'd found Jack at the diner, how 180 motorcycles had come to rescue his sister. When the defense attorney tried to suggest that Marcus had made things up, that he'd misheard the phone call, that children often exaggerated, Jack Cole stood up in the gallery. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. The defense attorney saw 180 pairs of eyes staring at him and quickly moved on to a different line of questioning. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Carl Simmons was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As he was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, he made the mistake of looking toward the gallery where Marcus sat with his new foster parents. Jack Cole caught his eye and smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. The man called Pearson, it turned out, wasn't just one buyer. It was a code name for an entire organization that operated across 3 states, facilitated by corrupt officials and protected by a web of bribes and blackmail. The Hells Angels' involvement had torn that web apart. When 180 bikers showed up at a farmhouse in rural Oklahoma, it made news. When the story came out about why they'd shown up, it made national headlines. Suddenly, journalists were investigating, federal agents were asking questions, and the people who'd been protecting Carl Simmons found themselves scrambling to distance themselves from a scandal that was getting bigger by the hour. Deputy Martinez, the corrupt officer who'd tipped off Carl about Marcus's previous attempt to get help, was arrested within a week. 3 other officials followed over the next month. The Pearson organization was dismantled piece by piece, with dozens of arrests across Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas. None of it would have happened without a boy who walked 2 hours through fields to ask a stranger for help. 6 months after the rescue, Marcus and Lily were living with a foster family in Tulsa. It was a good placement. A retired teacher named Helen Woodward and her husband Frank, who had room in their house and their hearts for 2 kids who needed stability and patience. The first few months had been hard. Marcus still woke up at night, heart pounding, certain that Uncle Carl had somehow escaped prison and found them. Lily still flinched when adults moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. Both children had trouble trusting that the good things in their new life, regular meals, clean clothes, a warm bed, adults who didn't hurt them, were actually real and permanent. Helen and Frank understood. They'd fostered children before, kids who came from hard places and carried invisible wounds. They knew that healing took time, that trust had to be earned one day at a time, that love alone wasn't enough. You also needed patience, consistency, and an unwavering commitment to showing up, no matter how many times a child pushed you away. Marcus pushed them away a lot at first. He tested boundaries, picked fights, stayed in his room for hours, refusing to come out. Part of him was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for Helen and Frank to reveal themselves as just another set of adults who would eventually hurt him. Better to push them away now than to let himself trust and be betrayed again. But they never gave up on him, never raised their voices, never threatened, never made him feel like a burden. When he was difficult, they stayed calm. When he was withdrawn, they gave him space, but let him know they were there. When he finally broke down crying one night, really crying, the kind of crying he hadn't allowed himself since his mother died, Frank sat with him in the dark and said nothing at all, just put a hand on his shoulder and let him grieve. Lily's healing was different. She was younger, more adaptable in some ways, but also more deeply wounded. She'd started talking again, slowly, tentatively, at first only to Marcus and then gradually to Helen and Frank. She'd started sleeping through the night most of the time. She'd even started playing, something she hadn't done in nearly 2 years. But there were still bad days. Days when a particular smell or sound would trigger a memory, and she'd go quiet and still, retreating to somewhere inside herself that no one could reach. Days when Marcus would find her hiding in the closet or under the bed, clutching the stuffed bear that Helen had given her, trembling with fear she couldn't explain. On those days, Marcus would crawl in beside her and hold her hand, and together they'd wait for the darkness to pass. "It gets better," he'd tell her, even when he wasn't sure he believed it himself. "It gets better, Lily. I promise." The thing that helped most, surprisingly, was the motorcycles. But every Sunday, without fail, a convoy of motorcycles would pull up to the curb. The neighbors had been alarmed at first. Concerned citizens had called the police more than once, reporting what looked like a gang gathering in their quiet residential street. But the police had stopped responding to those calls after the 3rd or 4th time, because everyone in the department knew who those bikers were and why they came. They came to take Marcus and Lily for ice cream, or to a baseball game, or just for a ride through the countryside, with Marcus perched on the back of Jack's Harley, and Lily riding with a female member named Rose, who'd unofficially adopted her, as a surrogate niece. They came because they'd made a promise. "We take care of our own," Victor had told the kids that first Sunday after they'd been placed with their new family. "And as far as this club is concerned, you two are our own now. That means birthdays, holidays, graduations, you name it, we're there. That means if anyone ever bothers you, ever threatens you, ever makes you feel unsafe, you call us and we show up. That's not charity, that's family." Marcus had looked at the gray-bearded president with eyes that were still too old, but maybe, finally, starting to heal. "Is that the code?" he'd asked. "The one my mom told me about?" Victor had smiled, a rare expression that transformed his weathered face. "That's the code, son. Protect the innocent, honor your word, and never ever leave your people behind." Marcus had thought about this for a moment. Then he'd turned to Jack, who was standing nearby with his arms crossed and his eyes suspiciously bright. "Can I learn to ride a motorcycle?" he'd asked. Jack had laughed, a big, booming sound that made several nearby bikers look over and smile. "Kid, when you're old enough, I will personally teach you everything I know. And when you're ready, you'll have 180 brothers and sisters who'll ride beside you wherever you go." "Promise?" "On my life." The story of Marcus and Lily Reeves became legend in motorcycle club circles. It was the kind of story that members told at rallies and gatherings, the kind that got passed down to prospects as an example of what the club stood for, what it meant to wear the patch and live by the code. But for the 180 riders who'd actually been there that day, it wasn't legend. It was just Tuesday. It was just a boy who needed help and a group of people who'd decided, decades ago, that helping people in need was more important than reputation or risk. It was just the code, lived out in real time, with real consequences and real lives at stake. "People always ask me why I ride," Jack would say, years later, when journalists or curious civilians wanted to understand what made someone join a motorcycle club. They think it's about rebellion, freedom, breaking rules, and yeah, some of it is. But mostly it's about this: being part of something bigger than yourself, having brothers and sisters who'll show up when you call, knowing that somewhere out there, some kid like Marcus might need someone to believe him, and being ready to be that someone. He'd pause then, looking out at whatever horizon happened to be in front of him, thinking about the boy who'd walked 2 hours through fields with nothing but courage and a dead mother's advice. "That's why I ride. That's why we all ride. Because the world is full of people who hurt kids, and the world needs people who'll do something about it. Not because someone tells them to, not because they'll get rewarded, just because it's the right thing to do. If you're watching this video and you know a child in danger, don't wait. Don't assume someone else will help. Don't let fear or uncertainty stop you from doing what needs to be done. Call a hotline. Contact law enforcement. Reach out to advocacy organizations. Or, if all else fails, find someone who'll listen. Someone who cares more about doing right than following rules. You might just save a life. And if you want to support the organizations that help children like Marcus and Lily, we've put links in the description below. Every donation, every volunteer hour, every share of this video helps raise awareness and fund the fight against child trafficking. Until next time, ride safe and watch out for each other. Because at the end of the day, that's all any of us can do. Watch out for the people who can't watch out for themselves. And if you're a kid watching this, a kid who maybe is going through something hard and doesn't know who to tell, remember Marcus. Remember that he was scared too. Remember that he didn't know if anyone would believe him, didn't know if his plan would work, didn't know if he'd survive the consequences if it failed. He did it anyway. Because some things are worth fighting for, even when fighting feels impossible. You're worth fighting for too. Don't forget that.